Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Free TV. It is Friday, September 13th. Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Free TV. It is Friday, September 13th of 2024. We're here on Friday the 13th, and we have a great show today here with Leo Zagami. He is, of course, the writer of the incredible series Confessions of an Illuminati, and he just came out with volume 11, which is the past, present, and future of mind control from Sun Tzu to MK Ultra, and wanted to present that at this pertinent time for the obvious of what's going on in the world with the mass psyop against the Western world, what's happening in this country right before the election, what just happened with the debate, what just happened on J13 with the attempted assassination. And so Leo's going to come in, he's going to jump into it, and I'm so glad to have him back on the show. He's full of incredible wisdom. Hi, Leo. Welcome back.
Everybody. Thank you for having me on.
Fantastic. So glad to see you. And I feel like it was just like a month ago that we were talking about your volume 10, which was amazing, about the Islamic secret societies and Freemasonry to do with everything going on in this whole globalist cartel, and where we find ourselves at now as they try to consolidate power. And here we are. There's your new one, and I don't have it yet. I can't wait. I'm so excited. So why don't you just jump in as to why you wanted to write this book? We'll move into current events a little later, and just talk about your motivations and where we're at with your book.
Yes, what prompted me to release this book in a relatively short time span after volume 10 was what happened to Donald J. Trump on the 13th of July, because I had been preparing a book on mind control for quite a while, but I was really pushed to release it with an extra chapter dedicated to this event that unfortunately happened on July 13th, 2024, which is once again a product of the present mind control, and also the past experiments in mind control that were conducted, like, for example, between 1953 and 1973 with Project MK Ultra. Immediately after the attempted assassination of Donald J. Trump, there was a lot of speculation on the internet, and unusually for the CIA, they came out actually with a statement stating that it had nothing to do with MK Ultra. But that was actually correct, because MK Ultra is something that was closed down in 1973. Of course, the results of those experiments that took place in those 20 years, well, those affect us to this day. And there was also development after MK Ultra of other specialist programs of mind control, psychological operations, especially within the military intelligence with their psy warriors, and of course, from the end of the 1970s, characters like Michael Aquino, John B. Alexander, Dan Stapleton, who also expired, The Man Who Stared at Goats, which came out of a series of documentaries, and of course, the real experience that was conducted in Fort Bragg by these psy warriors who tended to want to merge aspects of the paranormal with the possibility of using them within ordinary war settings. And today, psy warriors are in great demand in all the theaters of war, and they are first sent before the actual conventional weapons and the conventional militaries are sent in to prepare a little bit the situation with their propaganda, with their mind influence, with their cognitive warfare, because that's also a new chapter in mind control, which I talk about. NATO has readdressed their psychological operations as something a little bit more specific with cognitive warfare, because psychological operations are more related with propaganda. We saw the extent of their use in Iraq, as well as back in the days of the Vietnam War. And, it can be done with leaflets, it can be done with radio propaganda, with TV. It can be done nowadays also with the internet, and that's where cognitive warfare comes in, because cognitive warfare is the next stage of this mind control, which of course it's given to the masses in various ways, but also it was a way of bypassing. Up until 2012, we had problems on exercising psychological operations, fortunately, on the American citizens, because there was actually a law since 1948, the Smith-Mundt Act, which blocked without consent this kind of operations on US territory, and they were mainly addressed for abroad. So we were kind of spared by a lot of rubbish that was instead fed to our allies in NATO, especially in Europe. They were constantly monitored and psy-ops, because the intent was to reshape their minds after what happened during the Nazi fascist period, especially in Germany, in Italy. So these two countries, and I've grown up in one of them, as you know, in Italy, were particularly influenced by psychological operations. And of course, we can say that all the strategy of tension that went on in the 1970s with also the Moro affair that was conducted by Steve Pitsnick, who in fact has an extensive expertise in psychological operations and in psychology itself. So the dark side of psychology here is addressed, and now since 2012 with this amendment to the original act, they have a way of bypassing the blockade we had before, and they can actually direct the psy-ops, they say, mainly on the minorities which were under attack. They said, of course, that's what they claim. And the Arab minority, for example, under attack by Al-Qaeda and ISIS influence, when it's a little bit paradoxical, because like we explained in volume 10, both ISIS and Al-Qaeda are products of the Western of the Western battlefield, of NATO, of the United States, of Great Britain before them. So this book has also elements that, of course, indicate some involvement of psychological operations also with 9/11, because 9/11 was the biggest psychological operation before the pandemic. The pandemic was the psychological operation that benefited the big pharma, as the 9/11, the tragedy of 9/11 influenced and benefited, of course, the military industrial complex.
Absolutely. Wow. Okay. So that was a lot that you just put in there. And I'll link the Smith-Mundt Act below for people, so they can also access that while they're waiting to get your book in the mail. But I wanted to mention a few things of what you just brought up. So, you know, for instance, well, and also just want to mention it's two-month anniversary of the attempted murder on Trump today, on Friday the 13th. And at the end of the video, I want you to, because you know this like the back of your hand, tell people the original story of Friday the 13th, because it's right up your alley. If you will, at the end of the video. But I wanted to mention a few things that you said. For instance, the NATO situation. So we're kind of converging on what used to be done through like trauma-based mind control or propaganda, Ed Bernays, that kind of level. It has advanced into, you know, it's advanced into pharma and digital, right? And the combination of the two, the perception, the creation of perception, and then also it getting into our bodies through these devices and the pharma drugs. And what happened with you know, the COVID crap wasn't only to make money. Obviously, it was to get all that junk inside of us that's, you know, leading to the internet of bodies, you know, the ways to entrain us in all these digital ways. And everything that, you know, they've learned, you know, it started out with the occult, right? And it started out with all of their magical and alchemical means leading into then medicine and then technology, you know, and torture and everything they did in World War II and one. But we brought all that here.
Well, I mean, the history of mind control goes back to Sun Tzu, because when it comes to the art of war, psychological operations are part of the warfare scenario since ancient times. I mean, they were used by Genghis Khan, Napoleon. When I talk about psychological operation, I talk about influencing the enemy by sending maybe psy warriors in the future theater of war to prepare the warfare scenario by maybe spreading fake news about the fact that maybe Genghis Khan had 1 million soldiers, while instead maybe he will show up with a quarter. I'm of course here just speculating, but there was the extensive use of this kind of illusion by Genghis Khan, who, for example, would position in various parts of the battlefield his army, almost like an illusionist with his cards, to just so you will get confused, and the enemy will say, "Wow, this guy, he will win because he has the biggest army," or maybe also the most fierce, the most aggressive. They will say he will rape your daughters, he will do all kinds of things, and they will be terrorized. That is psychological influence in a war setting. And then we have mind control and brainwashing, which is a little bit different, because mind control and brainwashing are two different things. Brainwashing comes from psychology, from the first early experiments conducted by Ivan Pavlov, who then definitely influenced the early stages of the Soviet Union, because Vladimir Lenin went to him to ask him somehow to craft this new population, I mean, they had, of course, for thousands of years, they had been prone to respect a monarchy, an empire, and all of a sudden they had this new form of government, which was communism, that needed and wanted to use psychology, the dark side of psychology, to in some way convince the people that was the only ideology that should be in use and the best option. But then there is also, in the experiments of Ivan Pavlov with his dogs, this whole concept about giving and taking, about these dogs who, of course, will connect certain things like the use of the bell with then the possibility of food intake, or other things that showed that there was then at that point a reaction, a form of persuasion. And that is important also to understand. This gradual experimentation born out of the Soviet Union, which of course was a dictatorship, an authoritarian form of government, then were embraced also by the West, because the West didn't want to lose on this new technology of the mind, so they could rape their masses of all their will and coerce them into doing something, push them into doing something they didn't want to do. So we can say that regardless of the ideology, either communism or fascism or Nazism, these ideologies all made extensive use of propaganda and mind control techniques. Of course, they were not as advanced as they might be now, but they were, I'm sure that Goebbels would have dreamed of having the technology we have nowadays, but that's how it is. I mean, nowadays we have the power of persuasion in the age of AI and quantum computing that has even pushed a Stanford professor like B.J. Fogg to coin a new term, which is captology, derived from the acronym CAPT, or computers as persuasive technology. And this CAPT, we see it in everyday affairs, and also, of course, the use of social media. Social media can be used for cognitive warfare. A weapon that the Chinese have is TikTok, and up until now, regardless of the political charades from both sides, TikTok is still in use, so they're not really doing anything to stop it. So this cognitive warfare is fueled by this never-ending psy-op coming from both sides, from our enemies, or alleged enemies from China, from Russia, and of course from the deep state, from our deep state, which has of course also tried to kill Donald J. Trump, because then in the end, when you talk about the 10th assassination of Donald J. Trump, we see the same forces that we saw back in the days of the assassination of JFK, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy. We see the same forces in motion. And so I wanted to explain also the reality of the Manchurian Candidate, because MK Ultra is about programming assassins. That was the ultimate product they wanted to realize. They didn't probably do it with the precision they will have with today's technology, but they managed through the constant use of drugs, hypnosis, trauma-based techniques of various kinds, like psychic driving by Dr. Cameron, that was experimenting Sub-Project 68, which was one of the most infamous projects, sub-projects of MK Ultra, because then MK Ultra is called Project MK Ultra, but in reality it should be called Projects MK Ultra, because there were a number of sub-projects that were done under MK Ultra. And all this, of course, with always a different take between us and the rest of our alliance. Mm-hmm. Because, like I said, our alliance was the fruit of what happened in the Second World War. And 1 year after the Smith-Mundt Act, we have the creation of NATO in 1949, which then needs to be addressed in this whole warfare. Now they have a command center in Norfolk, Virginia, with the innovation hub of NATO, and they have a former officer of the French military intelligence who takes care of this operation up until recently. And this new product of mind control and manipulation has been used a lot since the beginning of the war with Russia, the extension of this war that already was in place, but of course after the invasion of the Donbass region came to full extent, and so they needed somehow to counteract what they perceive as the propaganda from the enemy, from Russia, from China, regarding this specific subject. The cognitive warfare of NATO is not always what we as citizens of countries that are part of the NATO treaty will like to have. You know, I mean, when we think of Zelensky, I think about a hideous comedian who was placed there by George Soros and who should have no possibility of continuing his whole operation. But unfortunately, you know, they want us to still go along with this Ukraine nonsense. And so the cognitive warfare is constantly there reminding us that we need to be on the side of Ukraine. We need to. So that is, for example, a typical product of present warfare.
The Ukraine psyop was very effective for quite a while. Eventually, people, I think when it starts to harm people to a certain degree, they start to wake up or break out of the spell, right, of a lot of these psyops. But we have with NATO, what just happened with Taylor Swift the other night. We know that NATO specifically has been grooming Taylor Swift, or at least making deals to get her, you know, whether it was the Eras tour, bringing it to Europe and shape the opinions right before the European elections. And now the very timed, obviously, coming out in support of Kamala after the hideous debate the other night. You know, that's just, it almost seems so obvious to us that it's crazy, but people should know that it's so deep in what you're saying.
It's very much coordinated.
Specifically, NATO who did this with her.
Yes, it's coordinated. I mean, they gave, of course, the questions to Kamala so she could rehearse and be, you know, a lot more fast in the response than Trump, and that was already something they did to facilitate this psyop. And of course, knowing how the whole thing will manifest in favor of Kamala, because they gave her, I repeat, the answers, the questions in advance, and she could prepare the answers. But aside from that, the PsyOps coordinated with Taylor Swift meant that immediately after the debate, Taylor Swift will make that announcement. I mean, that was planned for days. It wasn't just like suddenly Taylor Swift, oh, wow, I like this debate. I'm going to give my endorsement to Kamala Harris. That's nonsense. But it all helps hitting on from different sides. You see, they claim in cognitive warfare that they need to hack the mind, and that basically our brains are the battlefield of the future. So they need to win this mind war. And it, I must say that the present cognitive warfare has a lot to do also with the mind war concept of Michael Aquino, of the late Michael Aquino, who wanted to bypass the Smith-Mundt Act in the first place, and that's why he created this essay in 1980 with Commander Vallely, who then became a famous figure on Fox News, because a lot of these PsyOps operatives after end up in the newsrooms of various, no? So we have Aquino, who wanted to develop something that was distant from MK Ultra. He was very critical of MK Ultra. He said it even in his book Mind War. And I was in direct contact for a number of years with Michael Aquino during my time in the Monte Carlo Lodge, which is also one of the topics I touch in this book in a brief note on my own relationship with Michael Aquino. So this is not a book, when I talk about Michael Aquino, it's not about the specifically his Presidio case, which of course we all know about, and his alleged pedophilia practices and all the rest. And of course his satanic practices I have already discussed in my past books, so I don't need to readdress them. This is about mind control, manipulation, about psychological warfare, and Aquino was considered and still considered by people in NATO. When he went to do his infamous ritual in Wewelsburg Castle in the 80s, he actually visited most of the NATO bases in Europe, and he taught in those NATO bases techniques of psychological warfare. So he has a lot to do with the present stage.
Flesh that out some more for people, you know, because he was such an important figure and really kind of move things up a level. And
I mean, there is a lot of confusion, and I explain you why. Because, like I explained in this book, there's a lot of, since the beginning of the internet, MK Ultra has become a sort of urban legend, which often it's not reflective of the reality of MK Ultra. Okay, we know that most documents pertaining MK Ultra were conveniently eliminated in 1973. We still have some of them surfacing from time to time from various, various offices, maybe when they are disclosing certain secrets on this or this other topic, they find documents on MK Ultra and they disclose them. But aside from that, like I said earlier, Michael Aquino was critical of MK Ultra, was critical about experiments that were conducted earlier on with voluntaries, like, for example, Lee Harvey Oswald. Later on, with unwilling participants, with Operation Midnight Climax that was moved from New York to San Francisco. But they were experiments that often created problems, and that's why they had to work out various ways of always being able to use plausible deniability when they were doing these things. There was, of course, only one death that is asserted by MK Ultra. That is the death of, in the early stages, of a guy called Frank Olson, who was thrown out of the window, basically. But aside from that, there's probably a lot more victims in their hideous experiments. A lot more people who were traumatized by these experiments. Aquino didn't want that. He is much more subtle. He understood that MK Ultra was using, for example, San Francisco, because he was he had the possibility to arrive in San Francisco right at the end, let's say, the last period of MK Ultra. He was part of the 7th Battalion of Psychological Operations that was operating at the time in San Francisco, and either have been moved to another town here in California. But because of their operations, of their experiments with unwilling citizens, they will pollute, let's say, the city of San Francisco. They will generate all that mental health problem that nowadays is rampant in San Francisco. Of course, the initial reactions of their experiments might look even positive, like the flower power movement and everybody enjoying themselves, and San Francisco being at the center of this great transformation. But then we have also the dark side of those MK Ultra experiments with the foundation in 1966 of Anton LaVey's Church of Satan. In 1968, LaVey met with Aquino for the first time at the first screening of Rosemary's Baby, and later on, Michael Aquino will become a dominant force within his Church of Satan until in the middle of the 70s. He walked out of the Church of Satan to create a more esoteric form of Satanism with the Temple of Set, which was also embraced by many of the officers in military intelligence who dedicated themselves to psychological operations. So there is always a connection there with Satanism, with occultism, because like Michael Aquino said, the ideal mind war operator should be a magician. Magician is not only the magician in the occult, but a magician who understands also the stage magician tricks of illusionism. So embracing both magic with a C and magic with a K, as Aleister Crowley. That was the intention of Michael Aquino's experiments that were extremely focused also on technological innovations that were coming around, and so also the use of electromagnetic fields to influence the brain of the subjects. And he coined, in fact, a term, Aquino, which I also cite in this book, homo electromagneticus, because each man emanates a magnetic force. And here we go back to the origins of hypnosis with Franz Anton Mesmer, who himself was a family friend of Adam Weishaupt and his father, who was very much known at the eve of the French Revolution. And he had his, let's say, he had also another guy, his antagonist, who was very much into hypnotism, Count Cagliostro. But animal magnetism really gives us an idea of what hypnotism is all about. Later on, they will formalize it as hypnotism. They will encourage the use of the word hypnotism. But as we have just discussed, the homo electromagneticus is actually a good way of understanding where it all comes from, because we emanate a magnetic field from our body. Our heart pulsating generates that magnetic field. And at the same time, we have not only the magnetic field that is generated from our body, but also the magnetic field that might be generated by electric equipment, electronic equipment, that then will influence you inevitably. Yes. So Aquino was very much somebody who wanted to propose the use of electromagnetic fields in influencing the mind and certain frequencies and so on. He didn't yet have the technology to do everything he had envisioned, but today they have that technology. In fact, just a week before the attempted assassination of Donald J. Trump, an institute in South Korea has announced their discovery of what they have called the nanomind technology, this nanotechnology which they have used in experiments with mice, after mapping the whole brain and knowing exactly where to influence the brain. There is not anymore the problem of an invasive technology that needs to be inserted. You see, brain implants are not something new. People think of brain implants of something connected to Elon Musk, brain-computer interfaces. These are recent in the history of technology. These are recent discoveries and experimentations. But electrodes and other form of implants in the brain, well, they go back almost 100 years. And in my book, I show how Howard Hunt, who wrote under a pseudonym a book called We Were Controlled, that you can find, I guess nowadays it's being reprinted. It was published in 1967, in which he addressed the whole Lee Harvey Oswald case as a product of an implant that was given to him during his time in Russia. Though that is the thing which I tend to not really agree with, because Howard Hunt was the head of operation probably that day in Las Vegas, and he definitely wanted to blame the Russians. So let's blame the Russians, after instead preparing in a base in Japan Lee Harvey Oswald and giving him the money even to go to Russia. It was quite expensive at the time. You needed at least $1,000, an immense amount of money for the time, and then giving him another $4,000 to come back and live here with his new Russian wife. Now, that is something that already demonstrates the corrupt deep state has been working on this kind of Manchurian candidates for a very long time. And the Manchurian Candidate became, as you know, also a movie in 1962, which in 1963, after the assassination of Kennedy, as I explained in my book, was then censored for 20 years. And it was censored because it was revealing a little bit too much. Though the first version of the Manchurian Candidate with Frank Sinatra, on the contrary of the one with Denzel Washington, never touches on the implants. One instead, the one with Denzel Washington openly talks about an implant that is positioned inside the brain.
Yeah, it was exciting when the Denzel Washington one came out, and they did actually go there somewhat, you know.
And then there is also a change in the way that the candidate is Republicans in the early Manchurian Candidate based on the novel, while instead it becomes Democrats in the one in 2004. So there is a few changes there, which are also, I think, driven by political interest.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. And, you know, if we look at, well, let's bring it to the present day here with what we're looking at. I mean, we have, for one thing, you know, it's all the lone shooters where we have 6 of the 7 most recent school shooters were all in this, you know, trans chemically manipulated state, totally psychologically. I was Audrey Hale in Louisiana. She was the one who was in the Vanderbilt in treatment at Vanderbilt University psychology unit for like 20 years of her 27.
Well, I mean,
we have the same with. Let me just finish. So Thomas Crooks, right? We get him with his mental health issues and his connection. It's always the FBI, CIA, you know, connections with these shooters. Now the trans thing coming in, like with the Georgia shooter, Colt Gray, of what happened a couple of weeks ago in Georgia.
I mean, a little bit of a double standard there, because the father of the Georgia shooter gets immediately arrested and put in front of a judge, while instead the father of Thomas Crooks and the mother, who are both counselors, therapists, people who should know about mental health issues, they are left off the hook because the guy, well, of course, he's 20 years old, and so, but the year before, both of them had their guns given by the father. So, I mean, they should have the same standard. The father was the one who armed Thomas Crooks. So, and in my book, I explain how, unfortunately, we discovered in early August that suddenly his body was cremated. So why was he cremated? Because he had a specific substance in his body? Did he have implants in his body? These are things that we will never know because he was cremated.
Was it even him? You know, was it even Thomas Crooks? We don't know.
No, well, I must
not
say
there.
That, I must say that
saying, we don't know. We can't know. The body's not there.
I mean, we know that I base my books strictly on facts, no speculation. So from what we know, on the 13th of July, there was a ritual conducted in Bohemian Grove with the military industrial complex at the presence of Nancy Pelosi's husband, and they were all watching TV hoping that the guy would be killed. He didn't get killed by an act of God, but at the same time, 10 days after, the cremation was done on Thomas Crooks. 6 days after, there is the second public appearance of the parents, which are filmed only 2 times by Fox Digital, on the 23rd of July and on the 29th. And in these appearances, I mean, definitely you would say maybe the guy didn't even exist or whatever, because when you see the father coming out with a food thing out of a supermarket on the day his son is actually being cremated, but when you see the father, when you see how he reacts on the 29th, oh, I have to pee, you know, or he was really vulgar in front of the. When you see what kind of guys they are, the father and the mother, two libtards of the ultimate kind, then the fact that, and they're still actually working as therapists. I mean, they have not taken their licenses from these people. They had their licenses for like 15 years. They haven't taken their license, maybe even longer. And I'm shocked. I mean, these people should be immediately taken their license, as people should not trust them because their son did something that, you know, if they had, for example, one of their patients doing that, they will have some problems because they will be called in front of a judge, in front of the authorities, say, why didn't you recognize? So why didn't they recognize the pathology of the son? In my book,
that's when it gets into, it's not recognized, it's caused. You know, it's like you're saying, it's a Manchurian cancer. You know, these people are shaped and groomed and molded.
There is a difference.
And injected and drugged and mind controlled into being agents for intelligence, okay, to carry out actions and activities.
But there is two different approaches because, for example, Lee Harvey Oswald, if you know his story, we know he was a volunteer in MQ.
Yeah. Yep.
That's different. One instead, Thomas Crooks was targeted probably because he also went under the radar of the people who would brainwash him during that period. He also participated to that Black Rock spot. And at that point, he was, of course, the victim of cognitive warfare. And that cognitive warfare was addressed to him by the people who were programming him. In fact, we know that he was in contact with somebody even minutes before he attempted to kill Donald J. Trump. But all this connected to mental health bring us back to the issue which I discuss in my book also, that since the 50s, we have the first antidepressants being created in the 1950s. They will eventually be launched like fluoxetine, Prozac in the 1980s and 90s. And that coincides really with the rise of mass shootings. I mean, all the mass shootings, unfortunately, coincide in association with their efforts to market these antidepressants that was like this selective serotonin, you know, the imbalance in the brain and all this rubbish. Still to this day, the American Psychiatric Association talks about the chemical, the serotonin imbalance of the brain, which has been instead proved to be fake news by one of the best universities in the world that has recently said there is no evidence. And also in John Coleman's book, the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations from 2006, he made actually a frightening forecast about the antidepressants and what they will produce. So when he said in later years, we are going to discover that all of the random shootings in schools, post offices, and shopping malls were not random shootings at all. These actions were carried by conditioned and mind-controlled subjects who were carefully sought and put on dangerous mind-altering drugs like Prozac, AZT, Ritalin. That's why I'm saying that it would have benefited to have the possibility to analyze the body of Thomas Crooks. But in my book, I don't speculate on the fact he exists, he doesn't exist. I speculate just on the evidence that was brought forward, and that's enough to actually speculate that there was a wrongdoing there, because this congressman goes to Butler, Pennsylvania in early August 2024, and suddenly they tell him the coroner was even bypassed by the whole procedure. The FBI gave their approval, and they just went on with the cremation of this body, which is very unusual. So what were they hiding?
Yeah, they're certainly hiding something, and it's absolutely criminal. And it seems like in the next 10 days, we're about to get some massive information coming out. There's a lot of whistleblowers that have even gone to the next level here of just really that you can't, there's no way it was not and these are my views only, not a manufactured assassination attempt by obviously
No, but you're completely right.
intelligence out of NATO.
That's why I put him on the cover here. You see, here you have Thomas Crooks, and then you have Lee Harvey Oswald on the other side, and then you have Alan Deuce, who was the first civilian director of the CIA, and then you have Sun Tzu. Everything is symbolic of the creation of course, like I said, there is certain differences, and the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald lived and was actually part of the MK Ultra puts him on a different level of brainwashing and mind control, because he was definitely the subject of brainwashing directly, done with drugs and also probably with electrodes, then later on with an implant. And still to this day, we have most of these important key documents that are not unveiled. Even Trump didn't unveil them all after many promises. And then Joe Biden unveiled a little bit more, but still we have, and that's why 2 hours after the attempted assassination, we have this call. Trump calls RFK Jr., whose father was, of course, a victim of a Manchurian candidate. So the Manchurian candidate of today definitely can be programmed much more easily. The data on him can be retrieved much more easily through, of course, the use of social networks and so on. And so it's a completely different kind of situation from the past. But if they were already so advanced in the 60s, and imagine how advanced they are nowadays, and those who think that it was just a crazy act by a depressed guy, a lone gunman. Then also we have also this whole thing of the lone gunman that still to this day people claim there were others shooting there with Lee Harvey Oswald. But I don't think we will ever have an answer even for Thomas Crooks or for any other of these assassinations by the deep state. Fortunately, in the case of Trump, I repeat, it was an attempted assassination, but he would become part of a long line of victims. And that's why Melania Trump has just recently made that video to denounce the whole thing and say, why they didn't arrest him. Well, they didn't arrest him because they knew he was there. They knew exactly what he was doing. The Secret Service was in on it. They put some amateurs from the Homeland Security who were trained on a webinar. They did all kinds of things to simply facilitate. It's just almost like saying, please, yes, you can climb here. There is a little bit of an AC here. You can climb, go on the roof. No problem. We're not going to be there. Just please shoot him. Okay, fine. But this is crazy if you think about it.
It's beyond crazy. And, we need to insist that the truth come out. We need to absolutely. I mean, it should be people should be out in the streets protesting. It's been 2 months and it's as if it's old news. But I do believe in the next couple of weeks, it's going to really.
Personally, I see this event as having psychologically affected Donald J. Trump, who was not capable in the latest confrontation debate with Kamala Harris to bring out the best of himself. I think that Trump should have some mind control expert to readdress his whole psychological condition in order to give a better performance. Because you see, at one point, the anger got to him and he actually said it. I got a bullet on my head because of what you saying, guys, because of what you said. And that's true. But he could have gone much deeper in saying, I'm here by an act of God. You and your people have addressed against me a constant psychological warfare, a constant cognitive warfare, brainwashing the children and the kids of all the universities against me. And now you want to win these elections after what you did to me, which is completely anti-American. Well, I would have focused a little bit more on that. So I think that Trump doesn't have the best advisors. I think that unfortunately, we are under the constant psy-ops of polishing a third, which is Kamala Harris, and it's getting actually results because, this was the woman nobody even liked in her own party, and suddenly she's the hero. And that is also what happens with psychological operations, is about changing the perception of somebody, and they have managed to do so, because, like I said, if you went to somebody 3 or 4 months ago and say Kamala Harris, they will watch it, Kamala Harris president, and they will laugh at you. But instead now, oh, Kamala Harris, she's sharp, she's this, she's that, and so I think that Trump missed an opportunity there. The psy-op.
I want to mention a couple of things. Let me just jump in here before you finish that up, because I want to hear the rest of your analysis. But I believe something could have happened to Trump there in that theater that night, because they arrange it with the no audience. He goes in there. They have the weird lighting. The LED lights, we know, can be very dangerous. They can be used in all manner of ways to cause mental confusion. This is science and technology. This is not my opinion. He clearly was in a very strange light compared to her.
No, I mean, I explain in my book that you can basically change the setups of places and change the mindset of people. I mean, definitely, you are right in saying that he could have definitely been psyoped already by the surroundings, by what they might have told him before he went on stage, maybe triggering some weak spots he might have. And so, yeah, you're right.
But also just physically had, physically, when you're talking about Mike Aquino and what he wanted to do, they have achieved 10 times over with what they can do, even with LED lighting and electromagnetic frequencies, and directing, directing those towards a person. And, he, for one thing, I think a lot of it just completely backfired, and it's just been a travesty. So there's that part. But what Trump did manage to get out was tons of truth. And even though he didn't say it in the best way, and even though whatever was happening to him on that stage, because he was not himself, and I don't think it's as only attributed to some PTSD he had, from his experience. I think
there is also an element of being a little bit scared, because if it was me and I was completely not scared, I would say sorry. But the best, this intimate friend of Jill Biden is the head of the Secret Service, and this happens to me. Well, this would have been a very strong thing to say, and I think they would have got a lot of reactions. But instead, he didn't say, because he's probably afraid for his own life still to this day. Yeah. So
that is in the lion's den there, in the lion's den with, Emhoff is the best friends of Iger, and the whole ABC situation. So anyway, okay, So do you think, so with all of that said, and you wanting to write this book at this time, and as we go into the elections,
because I want to write the book because immediately after the 10th assassination, there will be the most wild speculations. And so when we say MK Ultra, it kind of is like a reoccurring theme. Every time we have some accident, something happening, immediately they take out this MK Ultra thing. But I want to be correct. MK Ultra is only part of mind control history, and we have to consider it as such. Of course, the product of those experiments, it becomes it becomes then known not only to the agency, as they call the CIA, but also to other groups. And in fact, we've seen a lot of cults, sects using those techniques in the years following the end of MK Ultra, which became known in the middle of the 70s. But then later on, I repeat, with the growth of the internet, MK Ultra became really a subject of many conspiracy theories that at times don't bring any evidence. I mean, when they talk, for example, about Michael Aquino, they always say, oh, Michael Aquino, Project Monarch. Then they take out this Katie O'Brien and all the rest. There is no evidence. I'm sorry. There is many sub-projects which we still don't know their names. Maybe Project Monarch was one of them. Maybe not. We don't know. So it's a little bit like wild speculation can then diminish the credibility of your assertion. And this book instead doesn't diminish any credibility of your assertion because it's based on facts rather than fiction or speculations. And those facts are enough to be scared about the future of America and of mankind, because they want to hack our mind now, and they want to take rid of our will and also our freedom of thought. That's what they are. They want to desperately control. Our freedom of thought is fundamental from our birth. So to take that freedom of thought from us with the later technology, the latest technology can do things that were unimaginable in the age of MK Ultra with the use of drugs. We don't need those drugs anymore now that we have complex algorithms, social networks, and it was actually Timothy Leary who branded the internet as the new LSD. So that should give you an idea. Now, as MK Ultra was like hand in hand with LSD for 20 years, now the future of mind control is hand in hand with the development of the internet and, of course, social media.
Yes, and now also, of course, this new culture of pharma needing to be, it's gone from the time of SSRIs now into the next level of mind control using these pharma drugs and, of course, the mRNA drugs and all of the venom-based drugs. All of this, like now they're pushing. The new problem is that everybody's fat because they need to have Ozempic, right? And so, they want to get these drugs into you that have things in them that literally do serve as a way for them to be able to harness your brain and to get you attached. They get the nanotech into you, they get the graphene into you, they get all of these basically, highly magnetic antenna arrays into your body to have you connected to their 5G and EMF systems. And that's been part of the whole COVID pandemic rollout, was to get that technology into our bodies in order to make us more hackable, in order to entrain our minds with the perceptions they want us to have us, to consolidate power. And really it's to steal everything, steal everything, kill us, and consolidate as much power as possible, right? So where do you see this going moving forward? I see a lot of people waking up enormously, breaking the spells. I believe that's a God, a God thing, a God shot into people, and that we're really seeing a lot of the dissolution.
Well, I mean, I conclude this book by saying that, and I want to, of course, spoil the whole content of the book, but I conclude by stating that up until now, the devil has not been able to read our thoughts. It's only God who knows our thoughts. This is stated in the Bible. So once we give, though, the possibility of computer-brain interfaces, which are a thing that in the future will be gradually pushed more and more by the transhumanists and other diableries that are inserted in our bodies through nanotechnology and so on, then at that point, the devil will know what we think. Cyber Satan will know what we think. And so that will be the end for us. That's really the mark of the beast, is ending our freedom because we have accepted something that is ungodly. And so I wanted to end up my book by stating that only God knows us and knows everything of us, and it should stay that way.
Absolutely, 100%. That's seeming like a great way to start winding up here. I couldn't agree with you more. We know that that Yuval Noah Harari creature, in his most recent book, I think it's called Nexus, he is saying, basically that AI will write the new, Bible, the new holy text, because who would be better to write our next holy text that can unify humanity in one giant, satanic AI God, would be this, artificial super intelligence. And that because of knowing everything there is to know about
no, but there is also, like explain in my book, this diabolic conjunction of intents that we have seen since the 1950s. Obviously, we know the story of James Vickery and the subliminal messages that were inserted allegedly in certain films to increase the sale of popcorn or Coke, Coca-Cola and all that. But imagine now algorithms that specifically target your brain with subliminal messages, and that happens daily. As soon as you go on Facebook or any other social network, boom, they start with that kind of thing. So The Hidden Persuaders, which was the book that shocked America and that came out in 1957, was one of the most influential books at the time. The Sunday Times talked about in London and other publications, and everybody was like amplifying the notoriety of the experiments that this market researcher had conducted, James Vickery, who died in 1977. But imagine an algorithm that can target your brain and in real time influence you through subliminal messaging. And that's why most people, they are like, oh, but how come my Facebook is just thinking what I'm thinking? This product or this other product? Well, that is how it works. So this new mind control is really at the ultimate level. And once you give your consent and they enter your phone, smartphone, computers, and so on, they know everything about you, and then they start bombarding you. That's how it works.
Yeah. Well, so and also
with the end, though, for deprogramming in my book, I give an opportunity for deprogramming because you see, deprogramming was first presented in the 70s as an alternative to all these cults that were using these mind control techniques increasingly, and they were becoming more and more insidious and scary so they created this deprogramming thing. Unfortunately, the deprogrammers of today, they are a bunch of leftist psychologists or who want to deprogram you from Donald J. Trump or from QAnon. I mean, that is what deprogrammers of today do. So they are the heirs of the deprogrammers of the 70s. And that kind of deprogramming doesn't really work. But deprogramming can be a possibility. Deprogramming us from the brainwashing of a cult or the brainwashing of a religion or the brainwashing of a political party like the Democrat Party. Because today, if you have been programmed within one of our major universities, most universities here in the United States, college campuses, you are programmed. And at that point, you need to be deprogrammed. And so while in the 70s, Ted Patrick created this cult awareness network, he founded this Citizen Freedom Foundation, and he basically was accused often to have violated US law because in these deprogramming operations, they were pretty rough. They went to the extent, and some movies actually show it. Now I don't remember exactly the movies, but I remember seeing it also in some movies. They show these deprogramming attempts, which were pretty rough. I mean, kidnapping the person, taking him from his own cult surrounding, and then gradually reinserting him in normality after, of course, deprogramming him from his ideology. There is ideologies, of course, that are really insidious today because they have been created by the programmers of the New World Order in the Frankfurt Institute, in the Tavistock Institute. The Tavistock Institute has been, before Tavistock, it was Tavistock Clinic during the Second World War, and then in 1947, after the reform of the NHS, it becomes Tavistock Institute, has been the birthplace of certain let's say, social engineering techniques, because then it becomes social engineering. And unfortunately, today's society is the victim of these social engineering techniques. And so deprogramming us from this kind of things will require a counter psychological attack on those beliefs. And at the same time, also is possible, though, through our own belief in God, which doesn't have to necessarily be connected with a specific religious practice, but definitely will help us if we have a belief in God, if we have a strong religious sense, and we don't get encapsulated in a sectarian way in some, a lot of people today talk about, it's great, the Mass in Latin is the ultimate solution of all our problems, almost, it seems. Well, of course, I embrace the fact that you like the Mass in Latin and you like what used to be a pre-Vatican II church. But in the end, even those kind of groups can become sectarian if they exaggerate by saying, this is the only kind of mass. It's like a presumption of superiority immediately. So deprogramming approaches need to be respectful of the person. Today they are exercised in a non-traumatic form. But like I said, unfortunately, most of these so-called exit counselors, like I explain in my book, are a bunch of leftists. So we should have exit counselors who are themselves not brainwashed by any political or religious ideology, and because we see it also with Scientology. They have that narcocon organization which they have created to recuperate people. Narcoconon, yes, that's how it's called. A little bit difficult to pronounce it. It's an organization which has helped a lot of people, but when I've studied it closely, well, I mean, it's a nightmare. Plus, it's connected to Scientology, who wants to use that deprogramming you from drugs to then program you into their religious cult. So it's almost like you're going from the oven to the frying pan. It's not really the best solution. So I hope that with my take on things, because my take is also take that comes from a personal experience. My father was a psychiatrist who, like I explained in my book, worked on Project MK Ultra in France for 2 years. He was in Paris, and he experimented LSD on behalf of Project MK Ultra. He then went on to work also as a Jung psychanalyst. He was very close to Meyer, who was the direct disciple of Carl Gustav Jung, who proposed him to direct his clinic in Switzerland. And he refused at one point. Even his own involvement with psychiatry. He completely rejected it, giving up on all his patients in the middle of the 70s because he was contrary to the political abuse of psychiatry, to the social engineering of the Tavistock Institute. And I remember myself, I was a kid when he was talking about these things, and I was shocked by seeing also his pain, because, as a professional, as somebody who has studied many years and who was really respected. He had a lot of clients who were VIPs, from politicians to actors, and he could have made a bunch of money. Instead, in the middle, he gives up on everything, and we need at that point to live in modest conditions for a few years before he found other ways of making money, and that was pretty demanding also on us as a family. But he did it because of the firm belief that what they were doing in psychiatry, in mental health, here in the Western world, not in the Soviet Union, was wrong. They like to accuse the Soviet Union of political abuse of psychiatry in the Soviet Union, brainwashing, this and that, but they were doing it here. And the paradox of all this was that when I started with my Illuminati confessions in 2006, I became the target of these people. I ended up, like I describe in my book, being arrested and brought to a mental institute where this professor of the Tavistock Institute, in front of my lawyer, said, I work for the Tavistock Institute. So at that point, I said, wow, bingo. I can, this is something I can use as testimony for my next book, which I use, of course. But I mean, it demonstrates that these people are really everywhere and that they take good care of their social engineering. As soon as there is somebody who is bringing unbalance to the social, and I was bringing unbalance because with my books, with my political involvement in 2013 with Berlusconi first, and then in the social unrest called Pitchfork Revolution in Italy, I was deemed a threat. Because my books were bestsellers. I was going on TV, on the radio. At that point, they censored me. They ordered the Order of the Journalists, which is a remain of the fascist time. They have an Order of Journalists. It's called the Order of Journalists. And I was a friend of mine calls me and I was in very good terms with them because as a journalist, I was in good terms, even if I was. I subscribed to the foreign press while I was in Italy. I always preferred to be part of the foreign press. Yeah. So, this guy calls me and says, Leo, I'm shocked. I say, why? well, as a journalist, I just got sent a thing where it says that you and another couple of people were part of the Pitchfork. We are from now on obliged to maintain censorship on your name, to never mention your game, to not invite you on any TV show, radio show, anything. I was like, oh,
game changer. Yeah.
It was really crazy. And I remember that a couple of hours after I went on TV for the last time, it was like on I think the 9th of December 2013 on national TV. And I stated some really heavy things that they didn't like. My Facebook was disappeared for a number of hours with no way to even open it to anything. It was suspended for a few hours.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, from that moment onwards, I was under the radar until, as you know, I fled Italy in May 2019. But I had moments in which they will come with a judge court order only for one of my recent posts on Facebook. And I was like, what? At 9 o'clock in the evening with the police sirens, we have a court. I was like, what are you talking about here? I mean,
yeah.
So becoming the target of that kind of interest, I also understood what it means to comply. And so my main message here in the book is don't comply, don't conform, and maintain the freedom of your thought at all costs.
Yes. Fantastic. Wow, what a great way to sum it up. Leo, you're amazing. You've done such great work, and it's such a service. People really need to get your book. So they go to leozagami.com, and your most recent, we've got The Confessions of Illuminati, Volume 11. This is the past, present, and future of mind control from Sun Tzu to MK Ultra. And I can't wait to get it. I'm going to be very excited, and I'm sure I'll be wanting to follow up with you again on another interview about it.
Absolutely. You know, I'm always here. I always enjoy our conversations, and I think that maybe digging deep in this book will make you maybe want to ask me other questions. I
do. I can hardly get a word in edgewise with you. That's the thing. You have so much to say, and then you mention like a million things, and then I'm like, oh, I want to But we'd be here for 5 hours. But next time I might try to herd some cats together, see if we could just chunk down a few more things to get maybe deeper into a few of these incredible issues you bring up, because there's just so many. Oh, but before we go, just because it is Friday the 13th, do you want to just give people a paragraph version of what is Friday the 13th? Where does it come from?
Well, I mean, in this book, I have I specifically dedicated some attention to the number 13 and 23, because 23 was the day in which they cremated Thomas Crooks, and 13 was the day in which, at the Bohemian Grove, where they were conducting this ritual, and it was also the day of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. On Friday the 13th, there was, of course, the moment in which Philip the Fair, with the approval of the Pope, started the persecution of the Knights Templars, and that's where it all comes from. That infamous day was forever casted, in the memory, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world. It became synonym with bad luck. Though there is probably also other reasons, because the number 13, of course, can be also connected to Judas and to the 12 disciples of Jesus Christ.
Absolutely, for sure. And I just wanted to mention too, before we go, I know we both need to go, but I wanted to say, along with that, the Bohemian Grove ritual, the assassination attempt, the cremation, you have the cremation of care, and then you have the cremation of crooks, right? But we also had in those couple of days that massive attempt to short sale a huge amount of stocks, including Rumble and Truth Social, that went through Austin. It was Austin Private Wealth. Austin Private Wealth, which is completely invested in by Kamala Harris, the Bidens, the Bushes, an enormous amount of money in short sales that they try to do. on Truth Social.
I mean, there is at the moment, of course, a war on certain social media. We have seen it with the arrest of the CEO of Telegram. We have seen it, of course, with the closure of X in Brazil. And we know that the first target of Kamala Harris' presidency, if she ever becomes president, will be X and Rumble. So these, I mean, these platforms are not conforming with their one-world ideology, and they don't conform with their cognitive warfare. You see, they want to have the possibility to control the cognitive warfare on every single social network in the world, and because the moment in which they have, some social networks which are not conforming with the cognitive warfare idea of the moment, then it creates an imbalance. And so in their one world government, one world religion, one world ideology, and conformism and compliance, they want to eliminate the possibility of social networks, the social media that are not, because social media today are fundamental for the dark persuasion forces of the New World Order. And they need to be available at all times. I mean, we saw what happened during the 2020 campaign, FBI, with Twitter. My account as Leo Zagami was frozen on Twitter, and it's still frozen there. I can't access anything. I have a new one as Leo Lion Zagami, which has a blue check mark. Fortunately, I managed to get that. But that one is frozen, and I couldn't even get Elon Musk to unfroze it. I mean, that was like the FBI, because I was interviewing people like the Proud Boys at the time. I was promoting heavily Trump, who intervened, and of course, when you had also all that BS surrounding Hunter Biden, his laptop, that got. I got YouTube to ban my main channel, then another channel, and then 15 other channels in 2 years following that, during the days of the pandemic and everything, in which you couldn't say anything and you would be removed. Nowadays we have Rumble, is an alternative. I personally, for my shows, use YouTube and Facebook only for the first part of my shows, and I say to my viewers that we will not touch on certain subjects during the first part of the shows. Then on the second part of the show is exclusively on X and Rumble. But imagine if Kamala Harris arrives in the White House, there will no longer be the possibility. Yeah. And that will be really hard on the freedom of speech and expression here in the United States, which is a constitutional guarantee. And as a new American, this year is my first year I can actually vote. I can vote, and I hope that my vote will be counted. Especially it's a little bit tough for what happens here in California. But let's pray and hope that things will turn out in the right way. Otherwise, we have a real problem here. We have the Sovietization of the United States. And it's not going to be a good thing, because all those techniques which I have addressed in the first chapter of my book that dealt with the conditioning that Ivan Pavlov experimented. I have a book here, no book, and if I have it, I can show you. This book is a rather interesting book. Came out in 1940. It's not a book that talks about what's happening now, because it came out in a pivotal time of human history, 1940. The Rape of the Masses, by a disciple of Ivan Pavlov, who is this Chakotin. And The Rape of the Masses, it's a very interesting book, because it shows you really how Mussolini and Hitler were profoundly influenced by these experiments, and of course the Soviet Union, because they had Pavlov, who was a pioneer. In my book, though, in my recent book, I also show you what happened in the West when they started to experiment with those Pavlovian techniques. Yeah. And they came out with the Little Albert experiment. Little Albert, because it was made on a guy, a little child called Albert. Yeah. And it's strange. It's kind of like, it's weird. It coincides with the name of a grimoire. Little Albert is also the name of a grimoire in my black magic. So okay.
It's not, you know, that whole stimulus response thing is the center of it all, right? And all of social behavior mechanisms come from there, and
Yes.
now it's getting really to the point where it's digital, and they're putting it inside of our bodies. So we have an uphill battle, but the truth is simple usually, and lies are complicated and convoluted, and so. Like
Well,
you said,
I suggest people to go and read my latest article on leozagami.com, which I just wrote, published, I think yesterday, and it's dedicated to the rape of the new rape of the masses using the social media. I mean, I think that authors from 100 years ago that kind of already discussed this, and I mean, it's quite interesting also to see who this book was dedicated to.
That's an interesting book. I can't wait to get my hands on a copy of that.
This book here is dedicated to H.G. Wells, just so we know.
Oh, well, there you go. No surprise. Yeah, so he was one of them. Okay.
Well, and I talk extensively, in fact, in my book about the connection between H.G. Wells, Aldous Huxley, of course, Orwell. All these people were connected. They were part of the same milieu. So it's important to understand their story. So definitely check out this book. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Leo. It's been longer than we expected. Everybody go to leozo.com, get that book. I'll link it below. And thank you so much, Leo, as always. God bless, and I'll see you next time. And everybody out there, you are free, and I will see you next time, TGIF, and have a great
Keep your mind free. Keep your mind free. Keep your mind free.
Yeah. Fantastic. I love that guy. And I want you all to please do go support him and get the book. He has been one of the really messed with ones and harassed and deplatformed, debanked, you know, thrown in jail, fleeing Italy, coming to this country, and he has great information. So I'm looking forward to reading it. I hope you are too. And again, if you found something in this interview, think it's added value or just helps to perk your spirits and keep you going in the fight, and you want to support the channel, there's ways to do so below. And I hope you have a great weekend and you are free. I'll see you on Monday.